During a family dinner where my daughter finally introduced me to her perfect fiancé, I received an anonymous text. Check your bank accounts now. Leave immediately. What I discovered made my blood run cold, and 20 minutes later, FBI agents were at their door. My name is Robert Chen, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I'd be telling you about how my own daughter's dream romance nearly destroyed my entire life savings. For 35 years, I worked as a senior bank examiner with Chase Manhattan, investigating financial fraud and protecting customers from sophisticated scams. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, necessary, and it provided a comfortable life while I raised Lisa as a single father after her mother died in a car accident when she was 16. Lisa had always been brilliant, even as a child. While other kids played video games, she built computers from spare parts and taught herself programming languages that most adults couldn't pronounce. I was so proud when she earned her computer science degree from NYU, graduating summa cum laude with job offers from 3 major tech companies. Her starting salary at a Manhattan software firm was more than I'd made in my best year at the bank. For the first few years after college, we maintained a close relationship. Lisa would call every weekend, visit for holidays, and occasionally ask for my professional opinion when her colleagues discussed investment strategies. She respected my banking experience, understanding that my 3 decades investigating financial crimes had given me insights that textbooks couldn't teach. Everything changed when she met James Fletcher. James was everything I wasn't. Young, charming, sophisticated, with expensive clothes and an easy confidence that came from never worrying about money. More importantly for Lisa, he represented the glamorous Manhattan lifestyle she'd dreamed of achieving: luxury restaurants, exclusive events, and access to New York's elite social circles. Their relationship developed with breathtaking speed. Within 2 months, Lisa was spending most nights at his expensive Tribeca apartment. Within 4 months, she'd moved in completely. Within 6 months, James had convinced her to quit her stable job and join his financial consulting firm as a technology specialist. "Dad, this is incredible," Lisa had said during one of our weekend phone calls, her voice buzzing with excitement. "James wants me to develop software for high-frequency trading algorithms. The profit potential is unlimited, and I'll be learning from the best financial minds in the city." I'd congratulated her, genuinely happy for her success, but something in her tone bothered me. A new arrogance, a casual dismissal of her previous modest lifestyle. She'd begun talking about money constantly, dropping figures and investment terms into every conversation as if they defined her worth. The first warning sign came during Thanksgiving dinner 8 months ago. Lisa had insisted we meet at an expensive Manhattan restaurant instead of our traditional celebration at my queen's apartment. She arrived wearing designer clothes I'd never seen before, carrying a handbag that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Your apartment is so cute, Dad," she'd said with a condescending smile when I mentioned missing our home-cooked tradition. "Very authentic. James keeps saying we should help you find something more suitable for your retirement years." The insult was subtle but clear. My modest home, where I'd raised her alone and created countless happy memories, was now beneath the standards of her new life. James Fletcher's influence was transforming my daughter into someone who measured relationships by bank account balances. Throughout that dinner, Lisa peppered the conversation with references to exclusive events she'd attended, expensive wines James had introduced her to, and investment opportunities that were generating incredible returns. She never asked about my health, my retirement adjustment, or the volunteer work I'd started at the local community center. "James has taught me so much about wealth building," she'd said over dessert that cost $40. "He showed me how people stay poor by being too conservative with money. Real wealth requires taking calculated risks that most people are too scared to consider." The phrase "people stay poor" stung deeply. I'd worked for 35 years, saved diligently, and provided everything she'd needed to build her successful career. But in her new world, my middle-class security represented failure rather than responsibility. "Sweetheart," I'd tried gently, "maybe you should be careful about risking too much too quickly. Investment markets can be unpredictable." "Dad, you're thinking like someone from your generation," she'd replied with barely concealed impatience. "James understands modern financial strategies that banks like Chase never offered their employees. He's shown me opportunities that could set us up for life. The conversation had ended awkwardly, with Lisa checking her phone repeatedly and mentioning how James was expecting her at an important networking event. As she kissed my cheek goodbye, I'd noticed her perfume was different. Expensive, sophisticated, nothing like the simple fragrance she'd worn since college. After that Thanksgiving dinner, our weekly phone calls became monthly, then sporadic. Lisa's visits to my apartment stopped entirely. Instead, she occasionally invited me to expensive restaurants in Manhattan, places where I felt obviously out of place among clientele who discussed six-figure art purchases over lunch. During these awkward meals, Lisa would update me on her glamorous, new life while carefully avoiding any mention of visiting Queens. She'd describe James's latest business ventures, their upcoming vacation to Europe, the luxury car he'd bought her as an investment bonus. Every story emphasized wealth, sophistication, and her growing distance from modest origins. The Christmas dinner had been particularly painful. Lisa had chosen a restaurant in Midtown that required reservations months in advance, where the cheapest entree cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a week. She'd arrived 20 minutes late, apologizing breathlessly about a crucial client meeting that had run long. James's firm is expanding internationally, she'd explained while ordering wine I'd never heard of. We're opening offices in London and Hong Kong. He says I'll probably need to travel extensively once my software platform launches. That sounds exciting, I'd replied, though something about her enthusiasm felt forced. What exactly does your software do? It's complicated, Dad. Algorithmic trading systems, cryptocurrency analysis, high-frequency market manipulation. She'd waved her hand dismissively. James says it's too technical for most people to understand. The phrase, too technical for most people, had bothered me significantly. In 35 years of banking, I'd learned that legitimate financial professionals enjoyed explaining their work to interested parties. Only scammers dismissed questions. By claiming their operations were too complicated for others to comprehend, James's family wants to meet you properly, she'd said near the end of that Christmas dinner, her voice carrying an odd nervousness. They're planning a family gathering next month. Very elegant, very upscale. James's parents are quite particular about appearances. I'd be honored to meet them, I'd replied, genuinely hoping to connect with the people who'd become so important to Lisa. The thing is, Dad? She'd paused, struggling with something uncomfortable. James's family moves in very exclusive social circles. They expect a certain level of presentation. Maybe we could go shopping beforehand? Update your wardrobe to something more appropriate for their social level? The implication had been crystal clear. My clothes weren't good enough for her fiancé's family. My appearance needed improvement before I could be presented to people who mattered. But I'd agreed, hoping that making an effort might bridge the growing gap between us. That shopping trip never happened. 3 weeks later, Lisa had called to cancel the dinner, claiming James's parents had been called away on urgent international business. A week after that, she'd stopped returning my calls entirely. The silence had stretched through winter and into spring. My modest Queens apartment felt emptier with each passing day. Family photos on the refrigerator seemed to mock me, with memories of happier times. I'd started wondering if I'd lost my daughter forever to a world where money mattered more than family bonds. During those lonely months, I'd thrown myself into volunteer work at the community center, helping elderly residents with their banking and financial questions. Many of them shared stories about adult children who'd become distant after achieving financial success, and I found comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in experiencing this kind of family alienation. Mrs. Rodriguez, an 82-year-old widow, had been particularly insightful during one of our conversations. "Mijo," she'd said while I helped her organize her monthly bills, "sometimes our children need to lose their way completely before they can find their way back to what matters. Love doesn't disappear just because pride builds walls around it." Her words had given me hope during the darkest period of estrangement, when I'd begun to wonder if Lisa would ever remember the values I'd tried to instill in her during her childhood. Then, yesterday afternoon, everything changed with a simple text message that made my hands shake with unexpected joy. "Dad, would you like to meet James properly? Dinner at our place Friday night? I know we haven't talked much lately, but I'd really like you to get to know him." I'd read the message 3 times, sitting in my empty apartment where the silence had become my only companion since retirement. After 8 months of painful distance, my daughter was reaching out again. "Yes," I'd typed back, my fingers trembling with hope. "I'd love that. Thank you for giving us another chance." Her response had come immediately. 7 p.m., James is excited to finally win you over. The rest of the week had passed in careful preparation. I'd bought a new shirt from the department store, polished my good shoes until they gleamed, and selected a bottle of wine that wouldn't embarrass me at what was clearly going to be an upscale dinner. I'd even gotten my hair cut and trimmed my beard, wanting to make the best possible impression. I'd also spent considerable time researching James Fletcher online, trying to find information about his financial consulting firm. The internet searches had yielded surprisingly little concrete information: a basic website with professional photos but no client testimonials, a LinkedIn profile with impressive credentials but no verifiable employment history, and mentions in a few business publications that seemed suspiciously generic. My banking instincts had been somewhat troubled by the lack of digital footprint for someone who claimed to run a successful financial consulting firm, but I'd attributed it to my own paranoia and the natural protectiveness of a father who wanted to ensure his daughter had chosen well. Friday evening found me standing before a gleaming high-rise in Tribeca, checking the address twice to make sure I hadn't made a mistake. The building stretched toward the sky like a monument to wealth, its glass facade reflecting the lights of Manhattan's financial district. The doorman, dressed in a formal uniform with gold braiding, greeted me with professional courtesy that spoke of expensive monthly fees and exclusive clientele. "Mr. Chen to see Lisa Chen in 24B, I announced, still adjusting to her decision to drop Fletcher from her name professionally. "Of course, sir. Ms. Chen is expecting you." The doorman's practiced smile suggested he was accustomed to greeting visitors who didn't quite fit the building's usual demographic. 24th floor, apartment B. The elevator bank is to your right." The elevator ride to the 24th floor felt like ascending to another world entirely. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, while polished brass fixtures reflected my nervous face back at me from multiple angles. When the doors opened with a whisper-quiet chime, Lisa waited in the hallway wearing a designer dress I'd never seen before, her smile radiant but somehow different. More polished, more careful. "Dad." She embraced me warmly, though I noticed. Her hug lasted precisely the right amount of time. Not too short to seem cold, not too long to seem desperate. "You look wonderful. James is so excited to meet you properly." She looked wonderful too, but expensively so. Her hair had been professionally styled, her makeup was flawless, and her jewelry caught the hallway lights with the subtle gleam of real gold and genuine stones. Everything about her appearance suggested a level of luxury that her software engineering salary couldn't possibly support. The apartment beyond the front door belonged in architectural magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Manhattan's glittering skyline, while modern furniture arranged with perfect precision created an atmosphere of sophisticated wealth. Abstract art I didn't recognize but assumed was expensive decorated pristine white walls, and fresh flowers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget filled the air with subtle perfume. "This place is incredible, sweetheart," I breathed, genuinely awed by the space. "How do you manage a place like this?" "Actually, Dad, James bought it as an investment property." Lisa's smile flickered for just a moment, like a candle in a breeze. "He said real estate in Tribeca only appreciates, so it made more financial sense than renting." The explanation sounded reasonable, but something nagged at my consciousness. Investment properties in this neighborhood started at several $1,000,000, far beyond what any legitimate financial consultant should be able to afford in his early 30s. James Fletcher materialized from what I assumed was the kitchen, moving with the confident grace of someone accustomed to making impressive first entrances. Tall and lean, impeccably dressed in casual wear that probably cost more than my monthly pension, with perfectly styled hair and teeth that definitely weren't natural. Everything about him screamed expensive maintenance and careful cultivation. "Mr. Chen!" He extended his hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, practiced but seemingly genuine. I can't tell you how much this means to Lisa. She's been wanting us to connect for months. "Call me Robert, please." I studied his face carefully, looking for the warning signs my banking experience had taught me to recognize. But James Fletcher? presented as exactly what he claimed to be: a successful young professional who'd captured my daughter's heart through charm and apparent prosperity. Robert it is. His smile seemed authentic, reaching his eyes in a way that suggested genuine warmth. Can I get you something to drink? We have an excellent 20-year-old scotch, or perhaps wine with dinner. The offer was gracious, but I noticed how casually he mentioned the age of the scotch, a detail designed to impress without seeming boastful. In my banking days, I'd learned that legitimate wealth whispered while criminal wealth shouted. James Fletcher seemed to understand that distinction perfectly. The dining room continued the apartment's theme of understated luxury: a table set for three with china that caught the candlelight perfectly, silver that gleamed without a single fingerprint, crystal glasses arranged with restaurant-quality precision, fresh orchids served as centerpieces, their exotic beauty suggesting they'd been specially ordered for this occasion. Lisa's told me so much about your banking career, James said as he poured wine into glasses that probably cost more individually than I typically spent on an entire bottle. 35 years with Chase Manhattan. That must have given you incredible insights into financial markets and investment strategies. It taught me to spot inconsistencies, I replied carefully, accepting the wine while studying his reaction. People often aren't what they initially appear to be, especially when money is involved. Lisa shot me a warning look that I pretended not to notice, but James laughed easily and apparently without concern. Absolutely right. Due diligence is everything in my business. I actually run a financial consulting firm that specializes in high net worth portfolio management and alternative investment strategies. The explanation sounded plausible, even impressive. His vocabulary was precise, his manner confident but not arrogant. If I hadn't spent decades investigating financial fraud, I might have been completely convinced by his presentation. Throughout dinner, perfectly prepared salmon that Lisa claimed to have cooked herself, though I suspected professional catering, given the restaurant-quality presentation, James demonstrated extensive knowledge of markets, investment strategies, and economic trends. His conversation felt natural, informed, convincing enough to fool most people who lacked specialized training in detecting financial deception. Dad, James has been helping me understand investment opportunities I never knew existed, Lisa said, proudly, her face glowing with admiration for her fiancé. He's shown me how to make my money work harder instead of just sitting in savings accounts earning practically nothing. What kind of opportunities? My professional curiosity overrode social politeness, despite Lisa's obvious discomfort with my questioning. James leaned forward eagerly, apparently welcoming the chance to discuss his expertise. Primarily, private equity deals in emerging technology companies. Pre-IPO investments with significant upside potential when these startups eventually go public. The kind of opportunities typically reserved for institutional investors with millions in assets, but I have connections that provide retail access to qualified individuals. Every word sounded legitimate, technically accurate, and impressively sophisticated. But something continued to nag at my consciousness. Maybe it was the way his eye contact was perfectly calibrated, or how his responses seemed too polished, like lines he'd delivered countless times before to other potential victims. That sounds fascinating, I said neutrally, testing his reaction. Which specific regulatory bodies oversee your firm's compliance and licensing? For just a fraction of a second, James hesitated, barely perceptible, but my trained eye caught the momentary uncertainty before his smooth response. We work with several oversight agencies, of course. SEC registration for our investment advisory services, plus state-level licensing depending on client locations and the specific nature of our investment vehicles. The answer was technically correct, but strategically vague, providing general information that sounded authoritative without offering specific details that could be verified. In 35 years of banking, I'd learned that honest financial professionals gave precise answers about their regulatory status, while criminals provided general truths that could mean anything or nothing. Lisa mentioned you're expanding internationally, I continued, watching his face carefully. That must require significant additional compliance work with foreign financial authorities. Absolutely, James replied smoothly, but I noticed his fingers drumming slightly against the table, a nervous tell that suggested stress despite his confident demeanor. International expansion brings wonderful opportunities, but also complex regulatory challenges across multiple jurisdictions. Again, the response sounded impressive but provided no verifiable information. A legitimate financial consultant expanding to London and Hong Kong would be excited to discuss specific regulatory partnerships, local hiring plans, and operational details. James Fletcher offered only generalities wrapped in sophisticated language. I'm curious about your client base. I pressed gently, my banker's instincts fully engaged now. Do you primarily work with individual investors, or do you also manage institutional portfolios? James's eye twitched almost imperceptibly. We focus primarily on high-net-worth individuals who appreciate personalized service and exclusive opportunities. Our client relationships are highly confidential, of course, but I can say that we typically work with people who have liquid assets, in the seven-figure range. The claim was designed to impress while deflecting specific questions about his business operations. Real financial advisors loved discussing their specializations and success stories, even without naming specific clients. James Fletcher seemed determined to avoid providing any verifiable information about his supposed expertise. James has been so generous with his knowledge, Lisa interjected, clearly sensing the tension building between us. He's taught me about cryptocurrency arbitrage, foreign exchange trading, and derivative strategies that I never knew existed. Cryptocurrency arbitrage, I repeated thoughtfully. That's quite sophisticated. What exchanges do you primarily use for those transactions? James's pause was longer this time, and I saw him swallow nervously before responding. We use a combination of platforms, depending on market conditions and liquidity requirements. The crypto space is very dynamic, so we have to remain flexible in our approach. Another non-answer wrapped in technical language. A real cryptocurrency trader would be eager to discuss specific platforms, trading strategies, and market insights. James Fletcher continued to offer vague responses that sounded knowledgeable, but provided no concrete information. My phone buzzed against my pocket, just as James was describing his latest guaranteed return investment strategy involving cryptocurrency, arbitrage, and algorithmic trading. I ignored it initially, not wanting to seem rude during what was clearly an important family moment that Lisa had arranged with considerable care. The buzzing continued insistently. Text message after text message, each vibration more urgent than the last, creating a rhythm that suggested emergency rather than casual communication. Excuse me, I apologized, pulling out my phone despite Lisa's obvious annoyance. I should check this in case it's an emergency. The number displayed was completely unfamiliar, not from my bank, my doctor's office, or any business I recognized. But the message that appeared on my screen made my blood freeze in my veins. Check your bank accounts now. James Fletcher is not his real name. Leave immediately. Evidence is being destroyed. My hands trembled as I read the words again, certain I must have misunderstood. Lisa and James continued their conversation about weekend plans to visit art galleries in the Hamptons, seemingly unaware that my entire world had just shifted on its axis. A second message appeared almost immediately. Identity theft operation. You are in danger. FBI contacted. A third message followed seconds later. He has been stealing from you for weeks. Get out now. I forced my expression to remain neutral while my mind raced with possibilities. The anonymous sender knew James's name, knew where I was at this exact moment, and felt compelled to warn me about immediate danger. This wasn't a random scam or mistaken identity. Someone with specific knowledge was trying to save me from something terrible. Robert? James's voice seemed to come from far away, though he was sitting directly across from me. Everything all right? You look pale. Just work-related, I managed, slipping the phone back into my pocket with hands that shook more than they should. Nothing urgent, but everything was urgent. Every professional instinct developed through decades of financial investigation screamed that I needed to verify my accounts immediately, privately, away from the people who might be monitoring. My reactions? Would you excuse me for a moment? I stood carefully, testing my balance and hoping my voice sounded normal. Just need to use the restroom. Lisa pointed toward a hallway lined with expensive artwork. Second door on the left, Dad. The bathroom was as luxurious as the rest of the apartment. Marble countertops, designer fixtures, and lighting that would have been appropriate in an upscale hotel. But I barely noticed the expensive details as my hands shook while opening my banking app and entering my credentials with fingers that seemed to belong to someone else. The loading screen seemed to take forever, those few seconds stretching into an eternity of dread. When the account information finally appeared, the numbers that filled my screen made me grab the marble countertop for physical support. My checking account, which had contained $47,000 that morning when I'd checked it before leaving for dinner, now showed a balance of $3,200. My savings account had been drained from $89,000 to less than $500. My investment account? My entire retirement security built through decades of careful saving had been liquidated and transferred to accounts I'd never authorized. Over $280,000 stolen. Gone. Vanished into digital space while I sat eating salmon and discussing weekend plans with the criminal who'd orchestrated my financial destruction. I scrolled frantically through the transaction history, my banker's trained eye recognizing the sophisticated nature of the theft. Electronic transfers authorized with my credentials, investment liquidations processed through my brokerage account, wire transfers to offshore accounts that would be nearly impossible to trace through normal banking channels. The transactions had all occurred within the past 2 hours while I'd been sitting at this dinner table. Someone had been accessing my accounts in real time, stealing everything I owned while I made polite conversation with my daughter and her fiancé. This wasn't simple credit card fraud or random identity theft conducted by amateurs. This was professional, financial devastation, executed with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of my banking habits, account numbers, and security protocols. Someone had been studying my financial life for weeks or months, preparing for this moment when I would be distracted by family reconciliation. The anonymous texter was absolutely right. James Fletcher, or whoever he really was, had systematically destroyed my financial life while I smiled, made polite conversation, and praised his investment expertise. My phone buzzed with another message. Leave now. Do not confront them. Police are 10 minutes away. 10 minutes. I had to maintain absolute normalcy for 10 more minutes while sitting across from the man who'd stolen my life savings, the man my daughter was planning to marry. Splashed cold water on my face, trying to compose features that wouldn't betray the rage and terror coursing through my system. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what I was. A terrified old man who'd been expertly manipulated by professionals who made their living exploiting family relationships. The walk back to the dining room felt like approaching a firing squad. Lisa and James looked up expectantly as I returned, their faces showing mild concern but no guilt whatsoever. James especially appeared perfectly relaxed, like someone genuinely enjoying a pleasant evening with future family members. Feeling better? Lisa asked with what seemed like authentic worry. You were gone for several minutes. I was starting to get concerned. Much better, I lied, retaking my seat while fighting to keep my voice steady. Just age catching up with me, I suppose. James chuckled sympathetically, his concern appearing completely genuine. I keep telling Lisa she needs to take better care of you. Maybe we should look into some investment strategies specifically designed for your retirement security. I know several advisors who specialize in senior portfolio management and wealth preservation. The audacity was absolutely breathtaking. He'd stolen everything I had while offering to help manage my non-existent assets. The criminal was so confident in his deception that he was actually mocking me to my face. That's very thoughtful, I replied carefully, amazed at my ability to maintain normal conversation. Though I should probably review my current financial situation before making any major changes. Of course, due diligence is everything in financial planning. James raised his wine glass in what might have been a toast or a mockery. To family, and to taking care of the people we love most. Lisa clinked her glass against his with obvious joy, beaming with happiness that made my heart break. She had no idea she was celebrating with a criminal who'd targeted her father for complete financial destruction while using their relationship as cover for his crimes. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. James noticed first, his head tilting slightly as he processed the sound with the wariness of someone accustomed to listening for law enforcement. Lisa remained oblivious, chatting enthusiastically about their upcoming engagement party and the guest list they'd been preparing. The sirens grew closer and closer, then stopped abruptly. Somewhere in the building, probably in the lobby 24 floors below. Federal agents were identifying themselves and requesting access to the residential floors. "Expecting more guests tonight?" James asked casually, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes and the way his hand moved unconsciously toward his pocket. "Not that I know of," Lisa replied innocently, moving toward the floor-to-ceiling windows to look down at the street below. "Dad, are you expecting anyone?" Before I could formulate an answer, someone knocked on the apartment door. Not the casual rap of social visitors or the polite tapping of neighbors, but the authoritative hammering of law enforcement officials who expected immediate compliance. "Federal agents, open the door immediately." James's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor as his carefully constructed facade finally cracked. Red wine spread across white stone like spilled blood, and his face went pale as the reality of his situation became undeniable. Lisa spun from the window, her face transforming from confusion to growing terror as she processed what was happening. "FBI?" she whispered. "Why would the FBI be here?" "I imagine," I said quietly, meeting James's eyes directly for the first time all evening. "They're here about the $280,000 you stole from my bank accounts while we were eating dinner and celebrating." Family. The apartment's front door exploded inward as federal agents in tactical gear swept through the entrance, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands that echoed off the high ceilings like thunder. "Everyone on the ground! Hands where we can see them! Move now!" Lisa screamed, dropping to her knees with her hands raised above her head, tears streaming down her face as her perfect evening transformed into a federal crime scene. James, or whatever his real name was, stood frozen for one crucial second, his mind probably calculating escape routes and contingency plans before attempting to run toward the balcony. 2 agents tackled him before he'd taken 3 steps, forcing him to the ground with professional efficiency while reading rights that would strip away his freedom for the next decade or more. "Marcus Webb," the lead agent announced as handcuffs clicked into place around his wrists. "You're under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes against elderly victims across multiple states." Marcus Webb, not James Fletcher, the man my daughter loved, the man she'd planned to marry, simply didn't exist. He was a carefully constructed fiction designed to exploit vulnerable people through their family relationships. "Dad," Lisa sobbed from her position on the marble floor. "What's happening? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, sweetheart," I replied as gently as possible while federal agents secured the scene around us. "But the man you were planning to marry has been systematically stealing from elderly victims across 6 states. Someone warned me just in time to prevent complete financial ruin." Agent Sarah Coleman approached me with official identification and the kind of professional sympathy that comes from years of dealing with financial crime victims. "Mr. Chen, we've been tracking Mr. Webb's organization for 8 months. Your anonymous tip tonight helped us coordinate this arrest with simultaneous evidence seizure at 3 other locations." "Anonymous tip?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I didn't call anyone." "Someone contacted our financial crimes hotline approximately 1 hour ago, provided this exact address, and gave detailed information about Mr. Webb's current operations. They knew about tonight's dinner, the timing of the financial transfers, everything we needed to execute this operation successfully." Through the chaos of evidence collection and suspect processing, I caught sight of a young woman standing in the hallway beyond the apartment door. Hispanic, maybe 30 years old, wearing what appeared to be a catering uniform and watching the arrests with an expression that mixed satisfaction with genuine sadness. She met my eyes briefly across the crowded apartment, nodded once with what seemed like relief, and disappeared down the hallway before I could speak to her or ask any questions. The anonymous texter. Someone who'd worked closely enough with Marcus Webb to know his methods, his timing, his victims, but who'd chosen conscience over complicity when she realized an elderly father was about to lose everything while celebrating his daughter's engagement. To a criminal. "Lisa." I knelt beside my sobbing daughter as agents allowed her to sit up against the expensive couch. "I know this is devastating, but you need to understand that you're not responsible for his crimes." "How could I not know?" she whispered, her voice breaking with each word. "How could I live with him, plan to marry him, share a bed with him, and not realize he was stealing from people like you?" because he was a professional criminal who specialized in this exact type of deception. These people study human psychology, exploit trust and love, manipulate emotions for profit. You were as much a victim as anyone else he targeted. Agent Coleman approached us with evidence bags containing laptops, smartphones, documents, and multiple flash drives. Mr. Chen, our preliminary review of seized materials shows that Mr. Webb's organization has stolen approximately $2.8 million from elderly victims over the past 18 months. Your accounts appear to have been just the latest target in a systematic operation. Will I be able to recover my money? I asked, though the question felt surreal given everything that had happened. Most of it, yes. Federal asset seizure will allow us to recover funds from accounts we've already located, plus property and vehicles purchased with stolen money. The recovery process takes several months, but we've had excellent success with cases like this. 1. As federal agents continued processing the crime scene, photographing evidence, and cataloging seized materials, Lisa and I sat together on the expensive couch that had been purchased with stolen money. Her world was collapsing around us, but for the first time in months, we were having an honest conversation about what really mattered. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered, leaning against my shoulder like she used to when she was small. "I should have listened when you expressed concerns about James. I should have known something was wrong when he kept dodging your questions about his business." "Love makes us blind to warning signs," I replied, thinking about my own marriage and how my wife had seen the best in everyone, sometimes to her detriment. "Your mother was the same way when she met me. She saw potential and goodness even when evidence suggested she should be more cautious." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like always, indifferent to the human dramas playing out in expensive apartments purchased with fraud. But somewhere in that maze of lights, an anonymous hero had chosen truth over self-preservation, risking her own safety to save a stranger's retirement. The federal processing took nearly 4 hours. By the time agents finished cataloging evidence and removing Marcus Webb in handcuffs, it was almost midnight. Lisa and I stood together in the apartment that was no longer hers, surrounded by luxury that had never been real. "I can't stay here," she said quietly, looking around at furniture and artwork that represented her complicity in crimes she'd never understood. "I can't sleep in a bed that was paid for with money stolen from people like you. You can stay with me in Queens until you figure out your next steps," I offered. "The couch folds out and it's not luxurious, but it's honest." She nodded gratefully, then began gathering personal items that were genuinely hers. Family photos, her laptop from her old job, clothes she'd owned before meeting Marcus Webb. Everything else would be seized as evidence or forfeited as proceeds of criminal activity. 2 weeks later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside, a handwritten note in careful script. "Mr. Chen, I worked for Marcus's organization for 6 months until I couldn't ignore what we were doing to good people. Like you. Elderly victims who deserved better than being targeted by criminals who exploited family relationships for profit. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you sooner, but I had to wait until I had enough evidence to ensure the FBI could arrest everyone involved. I hope you and your daughter can rebuild the trust that Marcus destroyed. A friend who believes in doing the right thing." Lisa moved back to Queens, taking a small apartment 3 blocks from mine that she could afford on her legitimate software engineering salary. We began having dinner together every Sunday, slowly rebuilding the relationship that fraud and manipulation had nearly destroyed permanently. The first few months were difficult. Lisa struggled with guilt over her involvement with Marcus, even though she'd been as much a victim as anyone else. She'd lost her job, her apartment, and most of her savings. But gradually, she began to heal and remember who she'd been before Marcus Webb entered her life. "Dad," she said during one of our Sunday dinners, "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed. The way he never wanted to visit your apartment, how he always changed the subject when you asked specific questions about his work, the way he seemed to have unlimited money but no clear source of income." "Criminals are experts at manipulation," I reminded her. "They study psychology, learn to exploit people's desires and insecurities. You wanted to believe in him because he represented everything you thought you wanted. But I should have trusted your instincts. You raised me to be smart about money, to ask questions, to be careful about people who seemed too good to be true. And you forgot those lessons temporarily because you were in love. That's not a character flaw. It's human nature. Marcus Webb was eventually sentenced to 12 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud and identity theft. His organization's assets were seized and distributed among victims through a federal restitution program, ultimately returning 85% of stolen funds to people like me. The catering worker who'd saved my financial life never came forward publicly, despite the FBI's efforts to locate and thank her. But I kept her note in my wallet as a daily reminder that heroes often work in shadows, asking nothing in return for doing what's right when it matters most. The recovery process was slower than I'd expected. Federal bureaucracy moved at its own pace, and it took 8 months before I received the first restitution check. But eventually, I recovered $238,000 of the $280,000 that had been stolen. The remaining funds had been transferred to offshore accounts that proved impossible to trace, but I considered myself fortunate to get back as much as I did. Lisa threw herself into rebuilding her career with the same intensity she'd once applied to her studies. She found a position with a cybersecurity firm that specialized in financial fraud prevention, using her experience as a victim to help protect others from similar scams. It's ironic, she told me during one of our dinners. Marcus thought he was destroying my life, but he actually helped me find my true calling. Now I spend my days helping banks and investment firms identify the exact type of schemes he was running. 6 months after the arrest, Lisa met David at a cybersecurity conference where she was presenting a paper on cryptocurrency fraud detection. He was a fellow software engineer who specialized in blockchain security, and their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared professional interests, rather than expensive gifts and lavish lifestyle promises. When she brought him to meet me, he arrived at my Queens apartment on foot, having taken the subway from his modest Brooklyn studio. He wore khakis that needed ironing and carried a small potted plant as a gift. "Mr. Chen," he said nervously, adjusting his glasses and fidgeting with the plant. "Lisa's told me about your banking experience and what happened with that criminal. I was hoping you might look over my investment portfolio sometime and give me advice. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything obvious or falling for any scams." I smiled, remembering another young man who'd spoken smooth words about guaranteed returns and exclusive opportunities. David's awkward sincerity, his genuine request for guidance rather than offering sophisticated investment advice, told me everything I needed to know about his character and intentions. "I'd be happy to help," I replied warmly. "But first, tell me about this plant. Lisa says you're quite the gardener." "It's a jade plant," David explained enthusiastically. "My grandmother always said they brought good luck and prosperity to a household. She kept one on her kitchen windowsill for 40 years, and it grew into this amazing tree. I started this one from a cutting she gave me before she passed away." As David described his grandmother's gardening wisdom and shared stories about their weekly visits when he was young, I caught Lisa's eye across my small kitchen table. She was smiling genuinely for the first time since the night her world had collapsed, and I knew that sometimes the most valuable things in life were the ones that couldn't be stolen, manipulated, or purchased with criminal proceeds. The wedding was small, held in the community center where I volunteered. Lisa wore her mother's simple white dress, which I'd preserved carefully in my closet for 20 years. David's grandmother's jade plant sat on the altar as their only decoration, surrounded by folding chairs filled with real friends who'd supported them through difficult times. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly widow who'd given me hope during my darkest period of estrangement, served as Lisa's matron of honor. Her words during the ceremony brought tears to my eyes. "Mija, true love isn't about expensive gifts or fancy promises. It's about someone who shows up every day, who values your heart more than your bank account, who makes you better than you were before." After the ceremony, as we shared cake and coffee in the same room where I'd learned to help elderly residents with their banking problems, Lisa pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Dad, I have something to tell you. David and I have been talking, and we want to start a nonprofit organization that helps elderly people protect themselves from financial fraud. We want to use our technical skills and your banking experience to create educational programs and early warning systems." "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. What would you call it?" "The Chen Foundation for Financial Safety. We want to honor Mom's memory and your career by helping people avoid the kind of manipulation I fell victim to." I felt tears gathering in my eyes as I thought about my late wife, who'd always believed in helping others and giving back to the community. She would have been so proud to see Lisa channeling her painful experience into something positive that could protect other families. "Your mother would love that idea," I managed to say. "She always said that our worst experiences often become our greatest opportunities to help others." 1 year later, the Chen Foundation had grown into a respected organization that provided financial fraud education to senior centers, community groups, and retirement communities throughout New York. Lisa and David had developed software that helped banks identify suspicious transaction patterns, while I traveled to various locations sharing my story and teaching people to recognize the warning signs of investment scams. During one of my presentations at a senior center in Brooklyn, an elderly woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Chen, your story saved my life savings." Last month, a young man approached me with exactly the kind of investment opportunity you described. He was charming, well-dressed, and promised guaranteed returns. "But I remembered your presentation about how criminals exploit family relationships, and I called my daughter instead of giving him my money." "What happened?" I asked, genuinely curious about the outcome. "My daughter did some research and discovered he was wanted in 3 states for elder fraud. The police arrested him the next day. If I hadn't attended your talk, I would have lost everything." Stories like hers made all the difficult memories worthwhile. Each person we helped protect from financial fraud justified the pain Lisa and I had endured during our own victimization. Sometimes, when I was having particularly difficult days remembering how close I'd come to losing everything, I would take out the anonymous letter and read it again. The mysterious catering worker who'd risked her own safety to warn me had never revealed her identity, but her courage had saved not just my retirement funds, but ultimately led to Lisa's redemption and our family's restoration. "Dad," Lisa said during one of our regular Sunday dinners, now held in the small apartment she shared with David, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if that woman hadn't sent you those text messages?" "I try not to think about it," I replied honestly, "but I suspect I would have lost everything, and you might have married a criminal without ever knowing the truth." "Do you think we'll ever find out who she was?" "Maybe someday. But honestly, I'm not sure it matters. Heroes don't always need recognition. Sometimes the most important thing is knowing that when it mattered most, someone chose to do the right thing." David looked up from the financial reports he'd been reviewing for the foundation. "I've been thinking about creating a reward fund for whistleblowers who report financial fraud. People who risk their jobs and safety to protect victims deserve support and recognition." "That's a beautiful idea," I said, thinking about how one anonymous text message had changed the course of our entire family's future. "Your grandmother would have approved of that kind of generosity." As evening fell over Queens, I looked around the small apartment where my daughter and son-in-law were building an honest life together. No expensive artwork or designer furniture, but filled with family photos, David's thriving plants, and the kind of genuine happiness that money couldn't buy. Sometimes the most dangerous predators wear the most charming masks and speak the most convincing words. But sometimes, when evil seems unstoppable and victims appear helpless, an unexpected hero emerges from the shadows to remind us that goodness still exists in the world, and that doing the right thing often requires tremendous personal courage. My phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Mijo, saw the news story about your foundation helping another family avoid fraud. Your wife is smiling down from heaven, proud of the good you're doing with the pain you survived." I smiled, remembering my wife's favorite saying, "The strongest flowers grow in the hardest soil." Lisa had grown stronger through her ordeal with Marcus Webb. Our relationship had deepened through shared adversity, and together we were helping protect other families from similar predators. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To listen to another story, click on the video suggestion that appears on your screen. Thank you for listening.